The sun rose slowly over the wheat fields of New Haven. Golden light spread across the land like honey, touching the simple homes and quiet streets of humanity's most peaceful colony. Children ran through the fields, laughing as they chased each other between the tall stalks. Farmers waved to their neighbors as they began their morning work. It was a beautiful day, like every day on this gentle world. Governor Daniel Harris stood on the balcony of the administration building and watched his people live their simple lives. He was a tall man with gray hair and kind eyes. He had served New Haven for 15 years, and he loved this place more than anywhere else in the universe. 40,000 souls called this world home. They were farmers, teachers, doctors, and scientists. They had come here to build something good, something peaceful. The galaxy was a dangerous place. Everyone knew this. Dozens of alien empires fought for power and territory among the stars. Wars erupted and ended. Species rose and fell. But humanity had chosen a different path. For 200 years they had spread among the stars with open hands and warm smiles. They traded fairly. They helped those in need. They never fired the first shot. Many alien species thought humans were weak because of this. They saw human kindness and called it cowardice. They watched human diplomats offer compromise after compromise and laughed at their softness. The humans did not seem to mind. They believed that patience and goodness would eventually win respect. Daniel Harris believed this too. He had spent his entire career building bridges with alien cultures. He had shared meals with species that looked like nightmares. He had found common ground with beings that thought in ways humans could barely understand. Peace was always possible, he believed. You just had to keep trying. That morning, a Vectari warship entered orbit around New Haven. The Vectari were a reptilian species with scaled skin and cold yellow eyes. Their empire spanned 100 worlds, all taken by force. They respected only strength. They understood only power. For years they had watched the human colony of New Haven with hungry eyes. The planet was rich and fertile. Its position would make an excellent military outpost, and its defenders were soft little creatures who talked when they should have fought. Ambassador Zethrak came down to the surface with a dozen armed guards. He was tall even for a Vectari, with dark green scales and a voice like grinding stone. He did not bow to Governor Harris. He did not offer words of greeting. He simply handed over a document and waited. Daniel Harris read the demands carefully. The Vectari wanted the northern continent. They wanted access to the planet's water supply. They wanted humans to pay tribute every year in food and resources. If these demands were not met, there would be consequences. The governor took a deep breath. He had dealt with difficult situations before. He smiled at the ambassador and invited him to sit down. Perhaps they could discuss this over tea. Perhaps they could find a solution that worked for everyone. Surely there was room for compromise. Zethrak stared at him with those cold yellow eyes. He did not sit. He did not drink tea. He simply repeated the demands and added that the humans had 3 days to respond. For 3 days, Daniel Harris worked without sleep. He contacted Earth for guidance. He prepared counteroffers. He suggested trade agreements, shared governance of certain regions, cultural exchange programs. He offered everything he could think of except surrender. He believed, truly believed, that reason would win in the end. On the 3rd day, Catherine Moore sat at her communication station in the colony's main building. She was 26 years old with short brown hair and tired eyes. She had joined the colonial service because she wanted to see the stars. She had never expected to see war. The first warning came at sunset. Sensors detected multiple ships dropping out of faster-than-light travel. Catherine counted them with growing horror. 10 ships, 20, 50. The Vectari had brought their entire regional fleet. She tried to send a distress signal, but something was jamming their communications. She tried again and again, her fingers shaking on the controls. Nothing went through. They were alone. Governor Harris was still trying to reach Ambassador Zethrak when the first bombs fell. The explosions lit up the night sky like 1,000 suns. Buildings that had stood for decades collapsed in seconds. Farms that had fed thousands burned to ash. The screaming began, and it did not stop. Daniel Harris ran through the chaos, shouting orders that no one could hear. He grabbed children and pushed them toward the emergency shelters. He helped wounded colonists to their feet. He did everything a good man could do in the face of absolute evil. A Vectari soldier found him near the central plaza. The governor raised his hands and tried to speak. He wanted to negotiate, to surrender, to do anything that might save his people. The soldier did not care. The soldier had orders. Catherine Moore saw the governor fall from her window. She saw the man who had believed so strongly in peace die with words of compromise still on his lips. Something broke inside her then, something that would never fully heal. She managed to get one signal through the jamming, just one, a short burst of data containing everything: the attack, the deaths, the coordinates, a desperate cry for help sent into the void. Then she ran. The massacre lasted 6 hours. The Vectari were thorough. They went street by street, building by building. They burned the farms. They destroyed the schools. They killed anyone they found, and they recorded everything. They broadcast the footage across the galaxy as a warning to others. This is what happens to the weak. This is what happens to those who do not fight back. This is the natural order of things. Of the 40,000 humans who had called New Haven home, only 2,000 escaped. They crowded onto transport ships and fled into the darkness, leaving behind everything they had built. They left behind friends and family. They left behind their dead. Catherine Moore was on the last ship to leave. She pressed her hand against the window and watched New Haven burn. She watched her world die, and she made a promise to herself and to every soul who had perished below. This would not go unanswered. The galaxy had seen humans as soft and weak. The galaxy had laughed at their kindness. The galaxy had watched 40,000 innocents die and done nothing. The galaxy was about to learn how wrong it had been. The news reached Earth on a cold winter morning. It came first as fragments, broken pieces of Catherine Moore's desperate transmission. Then the full horror became clear. New Haven was gone. 40,000 people were dead. The Vectari had broadcast their deaths across the galaxy like entertainment. Admiral William Grant sat alone in his office and watched the footage. He was 62 years old, a veteran of 3 small conflicts that had been resolved through negotiation. He had spent his entire career believing that humanity's peaceful approach was the right one. He had argued against building larger fleets. He had supported diplomatic solutions to every crisis. His nephew had lived on New Haven. His nephew had been 12 years old. His nephew was now a name on a list of the dead. The Admiral watched the footage 3 times. He watched the bombs fall. He watched the buildings collapse. He watched the Vectari soldiers move through the streets without mercy. He watched until his eyes burned and his hands shook. Then he closed the file and sat in silence for a very long time. Across Earth, similar scenes played out in millions of homes. Families gathered around screens and watched their loved ones die. Parents saw their children's last moments. Children saw their parents murdered. The footage spread everywhere because the Vectari had wanted everyone to see. They had wanted to demonstrate their power. They had wanted to show the galaxy what happened to species that were too weak to fight. They did not understand what they had done. The United Earth Council met in emergency session that night. Representatives from every nation on Earth filled the Great Hall. Some shouted for immediate war. Others called for calm and careful response. A few suggested that perhaps humanity should accept its place in the galaxy, that perhaps they were not meant to stand among the stars. The arguments went back and forth for hours. Diplomats spoke of sanctions and official protests. Military advisors presented defensive strategies. Politicians worried about costs and consequences. It seemed like the same discussions humanity always had, careful and measured and ultimately leading nowhere. Then President Margaret Collins rose to speak. She was 60 years old, a former diplomat who had built her reputation on bringing enemies together. She had negotiated treaties that had seemed impossible. She had believed, more than anyone, that words could solve any problem. She had been proud of humanity's peaceful nature. She carried a folder in her hands. She opened it slowly and began to read. Names. Just names. The names of every child who had died on New Haven. She read them one by one, slowly and clearly. Tommy Baker, age 4. Lily Sanders, age 7. Marcus Williams, age 2. The list went on and on. 1,243 children. She read every single name. It took her 4 hours. The council sat in complete silence. No one moved. No one spoke. Some wept openly. Others stared at the floor, unable to meet anyone's eyes. The weight of those names filled the room like a physical thing, pressing down on everyone present. When she finished the last name, President Collins closed the folder. She looked out at the council members, these men and women who had spent their lives talking and compromising and seeking peaceful solutions. Her voice was steady when she spoke, but there was something new in it, something hard and cold and absolutely certain. "We gave the galaxy our kindness," she said, "and they answered with our children's blood." She let the words hang in the air for a moment. Then she continued. "For 200 years, humanity has reached out with open hands. We have shared our food with the hungry. We have shared our medicine with the sick. We have offered friendship to anyone who would take it. We asked only to be treated as equals. We asked only to live in peace." She paused and looked directly at the camera that would broadcast her words across all of human space. "The Vectari saw our kindness and called it weakness. They watched our patience and laughed at our softness. They murdered our children and expected us to do nothing. They expected us to cry and mourn, and then go back to being the gentle fools they believed us to be." Her voice grew harder. They were wrong. The vote was unanimous. Every single representative voted yes. There was no more debate, no more discussion, no more careful weighing of options. Humanity had made its choice. That night, Earth sent a message to every corner of the known galaxy. It traveled on every frequency, to every world, every station, every ship. It was translated into 1,000 languages. It was simple and short and absolutely clear. Humanity has extended its hand in friendship for 2 centuries. That hand has been cut off. To the Vectari Dominion and any who would follow their example, we offer no more negotiations, no more compromises, no more polite requests. We are done being polite. The galactic community received the message with amusement. The Vectari High Command laughed out loud when they heard it. Humans making threats, humans promising consequences. It was a joke. Everyone knew that humans were traders and farmers and diplomats. Everyone knew they were soft creatures who talked instead of fighting. Ambassador Zethrock, the one who had delivered the demands to New Haven, gave an interview to galactic media. He smiled his cold reptilian smile and called the human message pathetic posturing. They were grieving, he said. They were upset. They would calm down eventually and accept reality. The weak did not threaten the strong. The weak did not survive. He had never seen human soldiers. None of them had. For 200 years, humanity had kept its warriors hidden. They had maintained a small defensive fleet and nothing more. They had focused on building rather than destroying. They had chosen peace, but choice was the key word. They had chosen peace. They had not been incapable of war. They had simply decided that war was not worth the cost. They had believed that kindness and patience would be rewarded. They had been wrong, and now they were making a different choice. Across human space, something changed. The grief and sorrow that had followed the massacre began to transform into something else. Something harder. Something more dangerous. Humanity had tried being kind. It had not worked. Now they would try something different. The galaxy had laughed at their message. The galaxy had dismissed their warning. The galaxy thought it knew what humans were capable of. The galaxy was about to receive an education. The transformation began within hours of the Council's vote. Across every human world, every station, every outpost, the orders went out. Factories that had spent decades producing tractors and farming equipment began making something very different. Research laboratories that had developed medicine and communication technology shifted their focus. Engineers who had built homes and hospitals started building weapons. Admiral William Grant was given command of the newly formed Earth Expeditionary Force. He accepted the position with a simple nod. There were no celebrations, no grand speeches. There was only work to be done. His first act was to recall Commander Lisa Bennett to active duty. She was 54 years old, brilliant and dangerous. She had been forced into early retirement 10 years earlier because her superiors thought she was too aggressive. She had designed battle tactics that her commanders called excessive and unnecessary. They had told her that humanity did not need such violent strategies. They had been wrong. Lisa Bennett arrived at command headquarters within 12 hours of receiving the call. She walked into Admiral Grant's office and saluted. Her eyes were sharp, her posture perfect. She had waited a decade for this moment. "You know what they did," the Admiral said. "I know. You know what we need to do." "I do." She paused for just a moment. "I designed contingency plans years ago, plans for exactly this situation. They told me they would never be needed." Admiral Grant nodded slowly. "Show me everything." The plans were detailed and thorough. Lisa Bennett had spent years thinking about how humanity would fight if it ever had to. She had studied every alien species, every military doctrine, every historical conflict in the galaxy. She had designed weapon systems, battle formations, and strategic approaches that had been filed away and forgotten. Now those files were opened. But the plans were only part of what emerged. For 200 years, humanity had presented a gentle face to the galaxy. They had kept their true capabilities hidden, not out of deception, but simply because they had hoped such things would never be needed. The galaxy believed human technology was average at best. They were wrong. Deep beneath the surface of Mars, massive shipyards came to life. They had been built in secret decades ago, just in case. Engineers worked around the clock, bringing together components that had been manufactured and stored over many years. The first ship to emerge was called the Retribution. It was 3 kilometers long. Its hull was covered in weapons that had no names in any alien language, rail guns that could punch through anything, energy shields that could absorb attacks that would destroy any other vessel, engines that could push the ship faster than anything else in the galaxy. It was a machine built for one purpose only: war. The Retribution was the first of 12 such ships. More were being built every day. Across human space, similar revelations occurred. Weapons that had been designed but never deployed were brought out of storage. Training programs that had existed only on paper were put into action. Soldiers who had served quiet careers suddenly found themselves preparing for the fight of their lives. Catherine Moore had survived New Haven. She had escaped on one of the last transports, carrying the memory of everything she had seen. The nightmares came every night. She saw Governor Harris falling. She heard the screams of children. She watched her world burn over and over again. She could have taken a safe assignment. She could have worked communications on some quiet station far from danger. Instead, she volunteered for the Ghost Division. The ghosts were special operations soldiers. They were trained for missions behind enemy lines, for infiltration and precision strikes. The training was brutal. Many who started did not finish. Catherine finished. Her commanding officer was Captain Samuel Price. He was 40 years old, calm and utterly lethal. He had spent his career training for wars that never came. Now he looked at his new recruits and saw something familiar in their eyes. Loss, anger, determination. "You are here because you want revenge," he told them on their first day. That is understandable, but revenge is not enough. Revenge is emotion. What we do requires control. We are not here to make ourselves feel better. We are here to make sure that what happened to New Haven never happens again. Catherine listened carefully. She had joined for revenge. She knew that. But as the training continued, she understood what Captain Price meant. Emotion could make you careless. Emotion could get you killed. She learned to take her anger and her grief and pack them away in a small, cold place inside herself. She could use them when needed, but they would not control her. The Vectari watched the increased activity in human space with mild interest. Their intelligence reports told them that humans lacked the biological capacity for sustained warfare. Humans were social creatures who formed attachments and felt empathy. Such beings could not maintain the cold brutality that true warfare required. The Vectari had fought many species. They knew what warriors looked like. Humans were not warriors. They were prey pretending to be predators. This assessment was delivered to the Vectari High Command with complete confidence. The admirals and generals read it and felt their certainty grow. The humans would make noise for a while. They would build some ships and train some soldiers. But when the time came for actual fighting, they would fold. They always did. Every soft species eventually accepted its place. They did not understand what they were looking at. Humans had spent 200 years being kind because they chose to be. They had turned away from their violent history because they wanted something better. But that history had not disappeared. It was still there, written in their blood and their bones. For thousands of years, humans had been the most effective killers their planet had ever produced. They had wiped out countless species. They had fought each other with terrible creativity. They had invented weapons that could destroy entire civilizations. They had stopped because they decided to stop, not because they could not continue. Now, across human space, that ancient capacity was awakening. The farmers remembered that their ancestors had been soldiers. The doctors remembered that their ancestors had been warriors. The diplomats remembered that their ancestors had built empires through blood and iron. Commander Lisa Bennett stood on the bridge of the Retribution and looked out at the fleet assembling around her. 12 massive warships, hundreds of support vessels, thousands of fighters and bombers, an army of soldiers ready to fight and die. Admiral Grant's voice came through the communication system. "The fleet is ready, Commander. We move in 48 hours. Lisa Bennett allowed herself a small smile. It was not a pleasant expression. "Let them laugh a little longer," she said. "They will not be laughing for much longer." The human fleet arrived in Vectari space without warning. There were no announcements, no demands, no offers of negotiation. One moment, the space around the military staging world of Keth Vora was empty. The next moment, it was filled with warships. The Vectari defense fleet scrambled to respond. They had been preparing for this moment, though they had not truly believed it would come. 200 ships moved into formation, their weapons charging, their crews confident. They had faced many enemies before. They had never lost a major engagement. Admiral Grant sat in the command center of the Retribution and watched the enemy fleet arrange itself. He felt no excitement, no fear. He felt only a cold, heavy weight in his chest. His nephew's face floated in his memory. 12 years old, gone forever. He opened a single communication channel to the Vectari commanders on the surface below. You showed no mercy to our children. We will show none to your soldiers." Then he closed the channel and gave the order. The Retribution fired first. Its main railguns sent projectiles screaming across space at a fraction of the speed of light. The first Vectari warship simply ceased to exist. One moment it was there, the next it was a cloud of expanding debris. The Vectari had never seen weapons like this. They had not believed such things were possible. Commander Lisa Bennett coordinated the assault from the bridge. Her voice remained calm and steady as she directed ships into position, called out targets, adjusted tactics on the fly. She had planned for this battle 1,000 times in her mind. Now she was living it. The human fighters swept forward in formations that the Vectari could not predict. They moved together like a single organism, each pilot knowing exactly where the others would be. When Vectari ships tried to intercept them, they split apart and reformed, always one step ahead, always in the perfect position to strike. The Vectari commanders began to panic. This was not how humans were supposed to fight. Humans were supposed to be hesitant and emotional. They were supposed to break under pressure. Instead, they fought with mechanical precision and absolute ruthlessness. On the surface of Kethevora, the Ghost Division struck. Catherine Moore led her squad through the darkness toward the main communications center. They moved in complete silence, shadows passing through shadows. The Vectari guards never saw them coming. One by one, they fell without making a sound. Captain Samuel Price coordinated the operation from a position outside the perimeter. His voice came through their earpieces, calm and precise. Target locations, guard rotations, timing windows. Everything had been planned down to the second. Catherine reached the communications hub and began planting charges. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was controlled. Somewhere deep inside her, the memory of New Haven burned like a cold fire, but she did not let it affect her movements. She was a weapon now. Weapons did not feel. Weapons did not hesitate. A Vectari officer stumbled upon her team as they were finishing their work. He raised his weapon and demanded to know who they were. How had they gotten here? How were humans capable of this? Catherine looked at him with empty eyes. "You taught us," she said. Then she pulled the trigger. In space, the battle had become a slaughter. The Vectari fleet that had been the pride of their empire was being torn apart. Human ships moved through them like wolves through sheep. Every tactic the Vectari tried was countered. Every formation was broken. Every counterattack was absorbed and answered with devastating force. Commander Bennett watched the enemy ships fall and whispered names under her breath. She had memorized the list of children who died on New Haven. Every name, every age, every face. As each Vectari vessel exploded, she spoke another name. A small memorial. A promise kept. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it was over, not a single Vectari warship remained operational. The surface installations had been destroyed with surgical precision. The military capacity of Kethevora had been completely eliminated, but the civilians had not been touched. This was the message humanity sent to the galaxy. They were not monsters. They did not wage war against innocents. Every bombing run had avoided population centers. Every ground assault had targeted only military installations. The Vectari civilians who had watched from their homes were left unharmed. The distinction was important. The Vectari had slaughtered everyone on New Haven without mercy. Humans could have done the same. They chose not to. They wanted the galaxy to understand that this was not revenge. This was justice. There was a difference. 3 more Vectari worlds fell in the following weeks. Each time the pattern was the same. The human fleet arrived without warning. Military targets were destroyed completely. Civilian populations were offered safe passage to evacuation zones. Those who surrendered were treated fairly. Those who fought were killed. The Vectari High Command watched their empire crumble and could not understand what was happening. These were the same humans who had smiled and offered compromise. These were the same soft creatures who had talked about peace and friendship. How had they become this? Ambassador Zethrak, who had laughed at humanity's warning message, stopped laughing. He sent desperate communications to allied species, begging for assistance. He contacted neutral parties, asking them to intervene. He reached out to everyone he could think of, promising anything in exchange for help. The galaxy responded with silence. No one wanted to stand between humanity and the Vectari. No one wanted to become the next target. Species that had dismissed humans as weak suddenly found reasons to stay far away from the conflict. Treaties of friendship were suddenly remembered. Old debts were suddenly important. The humans had made their point. Kindness was a choice. Patience was a choice. And when those choices were repaid with blood, different choices could be made. Admiral Grant received reports of each victory without celebration. He did not smile when enemy ships fell. He did not cheer when ground forces surrendered. He simply reviewed the numbers, planned the next operation, and thought about a 12-year-old boy who should have grown up to be something wonderful. The Vectari homeworld lay ahead, the final target, the heart of the Empire that had ordered the massacre of New Haven. "How long until we reach it?" the Admiral asked. Commander Bennett checked her displays. 14 days at current speed. And their remaining fleet? Gathering for a final defense. Everything they have left. Admiral Grant nodded slowly. Everything they had left would not be enough. Nothing would be enough. The Vectari had awakened something that should have remained asleep. They had poked a beast they did not understand. Now they would face the consequences. "Maintain course," he said quietly. "We finish this." The Vectari homeworld was called Vecthar Prime. It was a massive planet with towering cities and ancient fortresses. For 1,000 years, it had been the seat of an empire that had conquered and destroyed without mercy. Its people had never known defeat. They had never seen enemy ships in their sky. Now, 12 human warships hung in orbit above their world, and the last Vectari fleet lay in ruins around them. The final battle had been brief. The Vectari had gathered everything they had left, 300 ships crewed by desperate soldiers fighting for their home. They had fought with courage and determination. It had not mattered. The human fleet had cut through them like a knife through paper. Admiral Grant looked down at the planet below. Billions of Vectari lived there. Civilians who had nothing to do with the decision to attack New Haven. Children who had never harmed anyone. He could destroy it all. He had the power. No one could stop him. He thought about his nephew. He thought about the 40,000 people who had died screaming while the galaxy watched and did nothing. He thought about revenge and justice, and what kind of species humanity wanted to be. Then he opened a communication channel to the Vectari government. "This is Admiral William Grant of the Earth Expeditionary Force. Your military is destroyed. Your empire has fallen. You have 1 hour to surrender unconditionally. If you do not, we will land ground forces and take your leaders by force. We will not harm your civilians. We are not you." The Vectari surrendered in 43 minutes. The terms were absolute. Complete reparations for New Haven, payment that would take generations to complete. The dismantling of their entire military fleet. War crimes trials for everyone who had ordered or participated in the massacre. The Vectari Dominion, which had terrorized the galaxy for 1,000 years, was finished as a major power. Ambassador Zethrak was captured trying to flee the planet. He was brought before an interspecies tribunal that had been assembled to judge those responsible for New Haven. Representatives from dozens of species sat in judgment, species that had once been too afraid to say anything against the Vectari. Catherine Moore was called to testify. She walked into the tribunal chamber wearing her Ghost Division uniform. She was 30 years old now, 4 years older than she had been when she watched her world burn. Her eyes were calm. Her voice was steady. She told them everything. She told them about Governor Harris, who had believed in peace until his last breath. She told them about the children playing in the wheat fields on the morning of the attack. She told them about the screaming and the fire and the terrible silence that came after. She told them about the 2,000 survivors who had escaped with nothing but their lives and their nightmares. When she finished, the chief judge asked her a question. "The accused ordered the deaths of your people, your friends, your world. What punishment do you believe he deserves?" Catherine looked at Zethrak. He sat in his cage, stripped of his fine robes and his power. He was just a reptile now, small and afraid. She remembered how he had laughed at humanity. She remembered how he had called them weak and soft. "Death would be easy," she said. "Let him live. Let him live long enough to watch his empire become a warning story that parents tell their children. Let him live long enough to see his species become exactly what he thought we were. Weak, small, forgotten. That is justice." The tribunal agreed. Zethrak was sentenced to life imprisonment on a remote moon. He would watch from his cell as everything he had built crumbled into nothing. Admiral Grant returned to Earth as a hero. The people wanted parades and celebrations. They wanted to honor the man who had avenged New Haven. He refused all of it. Instead, he went to the memorial that had been built in Geneva. It was a simple wall of black stone with 40,000 names carved into its surface. At the center was a small box containing soil from New Haven, the only piece of that world that remained. He found his nephew's name and placed his hand against the cold stone. Commander Lisa Bennett stood beside him in silence. She understood. There was nothing to celebrate. They had done what needed to be done. That was all. President Margaret Collins gave one final address to the galaxy. It was broadcast on every frequency, translated into every language, heard by every species that could receive it. "Humanity came to the stars seeking friendship," she said. "We offered our hands, our knowledge, our good faith. We asked only to be treated as equals, to be given the chance to build something good alongside our galactic neighbors. Some saw our kindness and mistook it for weakness. They believed that because we chose peace, we were incapable of war. They were wrong." She paused, and her eyes seemed to look directly at everyone watching. "We are not predators by nature. We do not hunger for conquest or glory. We are protectors. We build. We create. We nurture. But when those we love are threatened, when our children are murdered, when our kindness is repaid with cruelty, we become something else, something that predators fear." Her voice hardened. "Let this be understood clearly by every species in the galaxy. We remain open to friendship, to trade, to cooperation. Our hand is extended once again to anyone who would take it in good faith. But let no one forget what happens when that hand is bitten. We are done being polite, but we have never stopped being dangerous." The galaxy listened. The galaxy remembered. In the years that followed, humanity took its place among the great powers. Other species that had once dismissed them now sought alliances. Aggressive empires that had considered human space an easy target quietly redirected their ambitions elsewhere. The lesson of New Haven spread far and wide. Human diplomats were still kind. Human traders were still fair. Human colonists were still peaceful. But behind every smile was the knowledge of what humans could become if pushed too far. Every species in the galaxy learned to respect that. On the anniversary of the massacre, a ceremony was held at the New Haven Memorial. Catherine Moore attended every year. She had risen through the ranks over time. She was an admiral now, commanding a fleet that protected human colonies throughout the galaxy. She had dedicated her life to making sure that no other world would suffer what hers had suffered. She stood before the wall of names and traced her fingers across the stone. She thought about the people she had known, the friends she had lost, the world that existed now only in memory. She thought about who she had been before the massacre, a young woman who had joined the colonial service because she wanted to see the stars. She had seen them. She had seen beauty and horror and everything in between. She had learned that the universe was not kind, that survival required strength as well as compassion. She had become something she had never expected to be. At the base of the memorial was a simple inscription that had been added after the war. She read it every year, a reminder of what humanity had learned among the stars. They died because we were kind. We changed so others might live. Humanity had found its place in the galaxy, not as the gentle newcomers who smiled at everything, not as the savage warriors who destroyed without thought. Something in between, something balanced, protectors who would never strike first, but who would always strike last. The stars stretched out endlessly above the memorial, full of wonder and danger and possibility. Somewhere out there, species were being born and dying. Empires were rising and falling. The great story of the universe continued without end. And humanity was part of it now. Truly part of it. No longer prey. No longer ignored. A species that had earned its place through blood and fire and the simple refusal to accept cruelty. Catherine Moore looked up at those distant lights and allowed herself a small smile. "We are still here," she whispered to the darkness. "We will always be here." The galaxy had learned to believe her.